Hello folks, my name is Marco Landry and today I'll be documenting the process of changing the oil on my Ducati 848 EVO. So if that's something of interest, stay right there and we'll get started right now. Alright folks, welcome back. So before we get started on the oil change, I just want to cover the material needed in order to complete that process. So obviously the first thing that you will need is some oil. So in this case, according to the shop manual, in my climate, I will need some 15W50 oil. In this case, I'm using the Motul 300V. So I've been using this on all my bikes for a long time. Very happy with it. It's a bit more expensive, but you do what you want to do in terms of oil. I know that for some folks out there, this is a religion. They believe that certain products are better than others. I'm not going to get into an argument with anyone around your decision to use a different brand. This is my favorite, but as long as you use what's recommended in the shop manual, you should be fine. So again, in my case, 15W50. You will need as well, if you don't want to get dirty, some latex gloves or shop gloves. So this is quite helpful when you're changing the oil. You don't get oil all over your hands. So that's it for that. You will need some paper towel or some shop rags as well because it's a little bit messy. You will also need an oil filter. In my case, I'm using the HIFLO FILTRO 153. So again, you can use different brands. I've been using this for a while as well, so quite happy with it. If not, you could also use the K&N. I have some K&N for my Yamaha. I ran out of the K&N for the Ducati, so I'll have to order some more, but K&N also has some really good filters for that application. In terms of removing the oil filter, they should not be very tight normally, but quite often people over tight them. So you can use various tools to remove the filter. You can see here, over the years I've collected a bunch of different tools. You have something like this where it will just grab around the filter and you can wrench it out or on. The pliers normally work a bit better for me, so you have these type of pliers that allows you to wrench the filter on and off, or you have these different things as well that you can use. I'm not a big fan of these. They quite often slip, but if that's the only thing you have, it's going to work. There's different sizes available as well, so make sure that the lube that you have will fit over the filter. Not only fit, but will be able to squeeze the filter to remove it properly. There's also this little gizmo here, and this thing does something very similar. So you can see it expands, it collapses. So when you are tightening or loosening the unit, it will grab around it and would allow you to just rotate it. I always find that they don't have a lot of grip. So in order for this to work properly, normally what I do is I put some duct tape around the filter so there's a bit better grip on your filter when you're grabbing this with these little claws here. So this is not my favorite tool by any means. I've had it in my tool chest for a long time, but again, if that's the only thing you have, that's going to work as well. My favorite and my go-to tool is this one normally, so I really like this one. This is Channellock number 209, and you can change the size of the grip, and they're quite nice. The handle is not too long as well, so when you're under the bike, you don't have something that's sticking out too far out. Versus this one here, you can see the difference between the two. So one is much longer than the other one. So again, it's a matter of personal preference. You can use whatever works for you. If you have a filter like this one here, like the K&N, that has a little nut at the end, you could certainly use that as well to remove the filter. I would typically not recommend using this to tighten the filter when you put it on. Just go finger tight, and after that you can use the pliers to finish the work. I'll cover this in more details in a few more minutes, but that's definitely an option as well. And the nice thing about having the nut on top is that if you go on the racetrack, there's a little hole in it as well, so you can safety wire this, and you don't need to put a clamp around your filter. So that's another great option if you can get one of these Canon filter with the nut on top. The other thing that you will need is a 5mm internal X wrench to remove the oil plug or the oil bolt. So you can either have it on a wrench or just by itself. Again, 5mm internal X. That will be needed to remove your drain plug. You will need something to catch the oil. Make sure it's big enough to receive all the old oil from the bike, and everything will fall into this, and after that you can recycle it according to your local regulations. If you have the shakes and you're not really good at pouring liquid into the engine block, you can use a funnel. I got different type of funnels here depending on the type of bike. And normally, if I want to measure the amount of oil I'm going to use, I use one of these. I use one of these big measuring cup to easily pour the liquid or the fluid or the oil into the bike. I think that's it, guys. These are all the tools needed to do this work. One last thing as well, I didn't mention. I totally forgot. It's the crush washer that will be needed as well. So again, this is a personal preference. Normally when I do an oil change, I will always replace the crush washer for the drain plug of the bike. So I'll show that to you in a few minutes. I'll also list all these items in the description below, so you can always refer back to that list of items before you start doing the work. Okay, so the first thing that you'll want to do, guys, when you do this process is to remove the lower right hand or the brake side fairing. So in order to remove this fairing, there's like 4 Allen bolts on the side here. That's connecting the upper side fairing to your lower fairing, and there's 1 bolt in the back, and there's like 3 little Allen bolts that are under the bike. So normally what I do is I remove the 3 that are underneath, and then I'll remove the 5 on the side, and that will just simply come out very easily. So you can see here the various holes. You got 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th one is here, and then you have the 3 underneath. So you got 1 here, the 2nd one, 3rd one, and that goes right there on the side. So this is the first thing that you need to do, remove this. And while you're removing this, what you can do as well is let the bike run so that it will come to temperature. Your oil needs to be a little bit hot before you can flush it out. So it's a lot easier to do this when your oil has been warmed up. So start the bike, remove the panel, stop the bike, and after that you can start the oil change. The first step will be to use the wrench and loosen up that drain bolt. And the drain bolt is on the left hand side of the bike, and there's a square area there with 4 little bolts. Don't touch these. You need to remove the one that's right here. So it should not be too tight. And when you do this, be careful not to touch your exhaust, because the exhaust will be super hot. And I'm gonna put the glove here so that it won't be too messy for my hands. And I got the paper towel or the shop towel that's gonna be close by as well, just in case something drips out. And I'll just lay my drain plug on top of this. So we're gonna go slowly loosening this up here, and you can see here the crush washer is there. Sometimes it's gonna stay stuck underneath, so just be aware of this when you are removing that drain plug. And then we are now set to go. And now that this is flowing, we can remove the oil filter. And now obviously with some oil on my gloves, it makes it a bit more slippery. So I'm just gonna wipe it down, make sure it's nice and clean and there's no oil on it that will make it even more slippery. And it's way too tight. I won't be able to remove it just with my hands. So I'm gonna try to remove it with the pliers here, or I could even try my 17 mil wrench, because there is a nut on top of this this filter. So I'm going to try the 17 mil wrench first, and here we go. And here we go. It was not super tight, but a bit too tight for me to be able to remove it with my bare hands. So when you do this, simply unscrew it and the oil will start dripping, which is totally normal. And again, you can recycle this, or you can figure out how you can dispose of it properly. So one thing I didn't mention as well is that when you remove the drain plug, it's a magnetized tip here that will attract all the small metal particles. So just inspect this and make sure there's no big chunk of metals. If there's a big chunk of metal, it might indicate that something else is wrong with the bike. But in my case, everything was nice and clean. There's no shaving at all. So I'm just gonna wipe it down, make sure it's nice and clean so that when I reinstall it, it's gonna be a lot easier and not as slippery. And here we go, we have that now. And while this is dripping, I'll let it drip like this for a few minutes, and I'm gonna go and see if I can find that crush washer. This is what it looks like. And you have your crush washer here, so this crush washer can be reused if you want to. So let's do it like this here so you can sit properly. So this is my crush washer, and I always change them, but if you don't want to change it, that's totally fine as well. Normally what I end up doing is I simply flip it on the other side, so I'll remove it and flip it on the other side, and I'll reuse it once more. So that's definitely something you can do. I prefer to change it, but again, if you don't have an extra one handy, you can probably just reuse it once or twice, but I would not do more than 2 oil change with 1 crush washer. So the next step now is to install the new filter. And when I do this, normally there's different ways of doing this obviously, but what I like to do normally for me is to fill the filter with some fresh oil. So I got some 15W50 oil here. So I'm just gonna fill up my filter with this oil. And just, it takes a bit of time. The air is gonna bubble up here. So when you fill this, just take your time. And when it gets full and it stops bubbling, what I do normally, I just take my finger, dip it in some of the oil and applying it on the seal so that it's nice and soft and it will not seize up, or it will prevent the seizing up, or help preventing the seizing up. So once this is done, now we are ready to start screwing this in place. Before doing so, however, I'm gonna put this aside here for a minute and maybe just gonna add a bit more oil in that filter. Make sure that's nice and full. And the next thing that I'm going to do just before installing it again, I'm going to take some shop towel and I'm going to clean the area around the engine where the air filter goes. So I'm just going to clean this up here as much as possible, make sure there's no dirt on there. And once this is done, we can take that filter and just make sure that you don't cross thread it, just center it properly, and then you can start just spinning it until it gets snug there. And once you can't twist anymore, that should be sufficient. In my case, I always like to just use my my Channellock and just tighten it just a little bit more. So here you can see I'm just going to take the pliers here and just give it just an extra a quarter turn, just for good measures, just because the bike vibrates quite a bit, so I want to make sure that it's not gonna come loose after a few rides. And then once you're done, just clean up everything, make sure that there's no oil remaining anywhere. Yeah, so once this is done, just wipe everything properly. And once this is nice and clean, I'm gonna clean the underneath area as well where the drain bolt goes. I'm gonna move this aside here. And what we're gonna do next is take that nut here, or that drain plug, and we are gonna do the same thing. Insert that drain plug, make sure that you are threading it properly, you're not cross threading. And I'm gonna use my 5mm wrench once more, and we are gonna tighten this in place here. There we go. So one last wipe, and we should be good to go. All right, so looks nice and clean here. So now we can drop the oil into the engine. So the next step now will be to add the oil. The Ducati shop manual recommends to add 3.7 liter of oil in your lubrication system. So I'm going to start with 3.7 and we'll see if it's enough. So in this case, this jug has 4 liters. So if I want 3.7, I'm going to take my measuring cup here and I'm going to dump 300 ml in this one, so that I'll know that I'll have exactly 3.7 liters in my container here. So here we go. All right, so that's about 300 ml that I have in this container here, and it means that I'm left with 3.7 liters in here. And I'm going to use a funnel for this, just to make my life a bit easier. And here we go. When you're doing this as well, just keep an eye under the bike to make sure that nothing is leaking, that everything is nice and tight, that your drain plug is secured properly, and the same for your filter. So nothing seems to be dripping. And you can also keep an eye on your oil quantity here. You want to make sure that you are between the 2 lines on that in that little window on the side there. So my goal right now is to fill this up until I'm in between the two lines. And when you're doing this, make sure that your bike is level. Quite often people do this with only the rear wheel on the stain and your front wheel is not on the stain, so this way it's an angle, or if your bike's tilted, you'll have a false reading. So make sure that your bike is level as much as possible when you are doing this. And even though it says 3.7, I always take my time, because the last thing you want is to overfill this, because it's a lot easier to add the oil than to remove it, obviously. So it's settling down now. It's just above the bottom line. It's getting very close to being in the middle, so I might not need the full 3.7 just yet. I'm going to start the bike, let it run for a bit, and this way the oil will propagate in the lubrication system, and then we'll add more if needed. So right now I'm almost at the second line, I should say. So I think that's going to be enough for now. I didn't put the full 3.7 liter. I'm going to put the cap on, and this is very delicate here. You don't want to cross thread this one. I'm going to start the bike, let it run for a couple of minutes, and then after that we'll come back, look at the gauge and see if it's at the right level or if I need to add some more. Okay, so now I'm going to start the bike and let it run for a couple of minutes. All right, so now I'm going to let the bike cool down for a couple of minutes and see where the oil level is, and if I need to add some more, I'll add some more. If not, we will just simply reassemble the lower side fairing. All right, folks, so we'll need to add a bit more oil. You can see here that the oil level in the viewfinder is right above the lower mark. I want this to be maybe just below the second or the top line there. So I'm going to add a little bit more oil, and that should be it. All right, so I'm going to remove the cap once more here, or the oil cap. Put it somewhere safe where there won't be any dirt going on it. I'm going to take my funnel again, put a funnel in, and start adding some oil while keeping an eye on that viewfinder here. I'm going to let it sit for a minute. It went up just a little bit here, so I'm going to add a bit more. And now I'm just above the middle portion here, so I'm going to add just a little bit more, and that's going to be it. Alright, so I'm going to take a piece of paper towel here, remove this, make sure that it doesn't drip anywhere, and that should be it. So it was in fact 3.7 liters that I needed, or maybe 3.6. There's a little bit left in the can there, and I'm right at the second line, or just below the second line, I should say. Put this little cap back on here and just tighten it with my fingers, wipe everything one last time. You can see now that the oil level is pretty much in line with the bottom of the second line, so that's exactly where I want it to be. All right, folks, that's it. As you can see, it's fairly easy to do an oil change on the Ducati 848. It takes about 25 minutes total to do an oil change and to remove and reassemble the fairing. So it's fairly easy, very satisfying. You don't need a lot of tools, and when you do it yourself, you know it's done right. In terms of frequency, Ducati is recommending that you change the oil every 12 months or every 12,000 kilometers. In my opinion, every 12,000 kilometers is a bit long. I would do it every 6 to 8K, but that's my preference. Obviously, if you're going to the track, you'll change that oil on a much more regular basis, and a lot less mileage than 12K. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, please connect with me on social media or post your comments below. I'm always happy to hear about your experiences and your feedback. And if that video was helpful, please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. And that's it for now. Until next time, stay safe, ride safe, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.